The Converted Man here. So recently Jordan Peterson had opened a new channel, which are just a number of clips that he has, and one of those clips is him answering whether or not he believes in the resurrection as actually happening, or started with, if he's a Christian or not, and then moved on to that. Well, there's a lot to say about that, because first, it's a belief statement, so it's nothing that anyone has to prove. When you say, I believe X, or I don't believe X, you don't have to prove that. That's not how it works. If you say X is true, or X is real, or X isn't true or isn't real, then there's some sort of proof that you have to give to that because you've made a statement about reality. Although there's the problem of universal negatives, but that's kind of a side note. But at any rate, by and large, you need at least an argument to why you would say that the thing isn't a thing. Here we don't have that. We have somebody asking what this person's belief is and a response to that question. Godless Cranium addressed this video and called Jordan a Christian apologist. I don't agree with that assessment at all. Christian apologetics is a whole field of philosophy. And there are many Christian apologists, of course, William Lane Craig and Matt Slick and Ray Comfort, although I would say that's lesser down on the apologetics, John Lennox, and there's others that are not as well known or hardly spoken of at all, say Seitan Bergengate, things like this. But apologetics is to give a defense of something. And so you can be anything apologetic. You can be an atheist apologist if you wanted to be, because you're just giving a defense of that. But when we hear the word apologist, I think we tend to associate it with Christian apologetics because they kind of popularized this idea. And these are the old arguments. These are the arguments that have been around and have been maybe brushed up a little bit, shined a little bit, but not really a lot of changes. So you'll hear different arguments from Aquinas, and you'll hear, the Kalam, and you'll hear these arguments that have already been dealt with many times being spewed by the Christian apologist. That's what makes them an apologist, is that they will present these arguments as if there's not a problem with them, and they'll defend the arguments, and they'll usually make a living doing so. William Lane Craig, of course, has made a living by basically saying the Kalam cosmological argument 50 times, or whatever, however many times he has used that particular argument. But Peterson is not that. Because when I've heard him speak about religion, he does so very carefully. When lecturing and it comes up, because God and faith and religion and Christianity and other religions are going to come up during intellectually heavy lectures, especially when you're trying to talk about how people's brains work, and God is a big part of a lot of people's way of thinking. So to not mention it would not be very good. But whenever he does in his school lectures and his university lectures, he's been, as far as I've seen, very careful to not say it's real or it's true, but talk about it as just another interesting historical thing to talk about, an interesting philosophical thing to talk about. In his latest lecture series, it's been all about the Bible. He presents another way of looking at the Bible, which I've said, so what? Because, and what I mean by that is, although it might be interesting to listen to, and I have listened to a couple of them at least, and I do find it interesting because it's another way to look at this idea, but it is a so what to me because it is just one more way of looking at this particular text that is out there. And it's no more valid or invalid than any way other that you could have to look at this text. But I would say it is a more palatable way. It is a more mundane-ish way of trying to say, well, you know, what were these people thinking when they wrote this story or came up with this story? What sort of world did they live in? And so it's certainly not literal, and he has said that it's not literal, it's metaphorical, deeply metaphorical. He has said that many times. He's related it to other religions. If he was doing Christian apologetics, it would be very unusual to hear any other religion mentioned at all. Typically with Christian apologists, you'll have them talk negatively about atheists, which is something that Peterson has kind of done, and I've called him out on that. Not that he would know who I am or anything, but, you know, I said, look, I think he needs to really talk to some atheists and really try to understand what it is they don't believe and why, because it seems like a lot of his ideas are based on personal ignorance. In that particular clip that Jordan's talking about his beliefs, I think you can see cognitive dissonance in action. But I can't know that for sure. I can't read his mind. But it seems like he's struggling with cognitive dissonance because one part of the intellectual mind says, no, this couldn't possibly, nothing like this could have happened. And the other part that wants to believe that it could have happened somehow in some way is saying, well, but maybe. And so he talks about, I don't know the limitations of the human body. Okay, so that's kind of basing your belief on a personal ignorance again. But that's something that people do, so it's understandable. He's not saying you should do that, or that anyone should do that, or that's a good thing to do. He's just saying that's what he does. And the agnostic stance that he takes in regards to whether or not the resurrection happened is the most moderate stance that somebody could have. So if somebody is believing in a God, which many people do, and it happens to be this particular Christian God, I would much rather that they believe in this way, that they are more uncertain about it, that they're questioning it and saying, well, maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, and I don't know which one, and maybe we can never figure out which one. That's at least a intellectually honest approach. My brother is a theist, and he has said to me that he has come to this conclusion that his faith in God is just faith, that that's all it can be, and whether that's good or not, or it doesn't matter, because it's just something that is part of the way he thinks, and perhaps the brain structure won't allow him to think a different way, because we all have different brains. So I think it's conceivable that some of our brains are going to be wired that they have to believe in God, some of them are going to be wired that they can't believe in God, and some of them are going to be somewhere in between. So I believed in God once and then I deconverted. So maybe I have one of the brains that's somewhere in between that can switch back and forth. Or maybe I can't switch because I've decided on the system that I want to use, and because of that system there is no way to switch back. But if I hadn't decided on that system, perhaps I could. Who knows? I don't know. So, the lectures on the Bible are something of interest in the sense of, here's another way to look at the Bible. Here's a more modern way, a less dogmatic way. And I think that's a lot better than what the theists have been giving us for years. You won't hear a Christian apologist say biological evolution is true, hands down, no problem with it. Craig, big time example of this, has said and written when asked about biological, he said, my concerns about it would be scientific, and it really doesn't matter if you believe it or not, because it doesn't affect your salvation. Well, do you agree with it or not? He won't answer that question. He won't say yes or no. Matt Slick, very much the same way. In fact, my discussion with Slick years back now, where I asked him how old the age of the Earth was, and he said he was agnostic to the age of the Earth. What does that even mean? That is unlike. Now, see, that I have a problem with, but I don't have a problem with Peterson saying that he's agnostic towards the resurrection. And I think it's because the difference between Slick and Jordan is that Jordan is honest and Slick is not honest in his approach, or in the way that he tries to figure out what it is he's thinking about. Because you walk away from a conversation with any of these apologists, and I think that you would walk away very dissatisfied in that you couldn't reach them, even though you know that the debate's about the audience and not them. And I remember analyzing the Matt Slick, no, not the Matt Slick, the Matt Dillahunty and Site 10 Bergengate debate, where Dillahunty was saying the reason why this is so frustrating is blah blah blah, and sighs in his smugness, I'm not irritated, I expect this, haha. It's just being a higher than thou attitude emitting from his presence, his aura, if you will, just emitting this just cringiness. To be an apologist of anything is to give a defense of it and to make it and to promote it without any sort of I don't know if I want to say self-awareness, but if you watch the 1 Minute Apologist at all, you'll see examples of these very bad apologetics at play, where the question is set up in advance and they answer it rather quickly, and it's like, see, it was such a simple answer, so those atheists, they just don't get it, and it's always against the atheist, and it's always that Christianity is the only thing around. We're not going to talk about anything else, we're not going to discuss anything else, we're not going to talk about the similarities between Christianity and any other religion, or that it could have possibly come from anything else. That's off the book. That's not going to happen with an apologist. And so when you have Peterson talking about religion, I do not see any sign that he's doing apologetics in that way. And if he's doing apologetics, it's a new form of apologetics, which I would be totally for. And you might say, whoa! Well, let me explain. It's a far better apologetic, because it doesn't say that anything is true. It doesn't deny science at any point. In fact, it incorporates science and says, yes, evolution, absolutely, yes. We're talking about 4.54 billion years for the Earth, 13 billion years for the universe. That's in there, definitely. Yes, this came from, this story is very much like this story, and that's probably where it came from. It's admitting all of that. So, if I'd rather theists gravitate towards that because the fundamentalists have to go away. They have to. And the only way that change can come is from within. So if he's doing apologetics, I'm on board with that version, because this old version sucks. And there's no logical fallacies I can find. At least not... Okay, I found some, but I mean, he's not giving syllogisms. He's not giving arguments that these things are true. When he presents why he thinks X, Y, and Z, you can find those logical fallacies, as I've already said. There's an appeal to ignorance in regards to, well, what can the human body survive? You know, there's a some sort of a disconnect of, you know, I can't say yes, I can't say no, I have to, but instead of being uncertain, he has chosen the word agnostic, which usually means nobody can know one way or the other. That's usually what that word means. It's not just I don't know, but it's no one can know. And that's a bigger claim to make, I think, which is my only issue with agnosticism, so to speak. But that's only one definition of it, and there's a different definition that you could use, and then fine, whatever. I don't have an issue with that definition. Although I don't know why you would use the word when I don't know works just as well, but oh well. What else? I think that's really all I wanted to say. Not to say, hey, that guy, Godless Cranium, is wrong. Probably doesn't even know really who I am or whatever. I mean, I briefly sent an email to him and briefly interacted, but other than that, you know, I have nothing against the guy or anything like that. So, but I've been wrong, so anybody can be wrong. It's okay to be wrong. It's good to be wrong. But that's not what this is about. This is more about, you know, here's someone, and yes, I've come to respect Dr. Jordan Peterson. You might say, oh, that influences my ideas, and it might. But the apologetic idea, no, that doesn't work with me. And at the end of the day, I would also say it's not too important what he believes. That's kind of a side note. It's interesting, but what's more interesting is what he presents as being true. And that's something that I have not yet caught him in, saying that there's really a God or that there's really a supernatural. And in fact, thinking about his stance on the resurrection, what you have is basically somebody saying maybe somebody survived a very traumatic event. But that's still a human. See, you note that. He's talking about, I don't know what a human body can do. Not a divine being. So this would be a person named Jesus who had thought to been killed and perhaps appeared dead, but their body was somehow able to recover anyways. That's the swoon theory or hypothesis that some atheists have done in response to the Jesus resurrection story, that, well, Jesus didn't really die, he kind of just fainted, or, well, he died, but it wasn't as severe as the story makes it out to be. And the counter to that is that the Romans really knew how to crucify people, and that they're really, really, really good at making sure you're dead, and so he was definitely for sure dead. Well, but people today have come back from being dead and even being in the morgue. That's why they have this little string hanging down over the bodies in the morgue, so that if somebody's not dead, they can pull it and it will alert the medical staff. And that's happened every now and then. Maybe not with this severe of an injury, although there has been radically severe injuries that we know about. This guy had a spike driven through his head and survived that, and this was like in the Wild West time when there's no, medical technology isn't really there. So you can survive that stuff. So can you survive something like this? I don't think so. I would say no. But that's only taking it at face value of what the text actually says. If you are allowing that this is actually a blown up legend, that maybe it's just something happened, their leader got hurt really badly and seemed like he was dead, and then that story just got exaggerated over time, well, then yeah, there's a possibility that some human got hurt, seemed to be dead, and then recovered. That's possible. I don't think that there was such a human named Jesus at all. I think that the evidence against there being an actual Jesus is, for me, pretty cut and dry, but it's kind of a secondary note to everything else. It's just like, even if the guy existed, he'd still be a mere mortal and be mundane, which means that what Peterson is essentially saying is he is somewhere, maybe, and this is a lot of trying to look into his mind, so to speak, so this is all very hypothetical, but trying to imagine a way where a mortal human could have had this serious of an injury, and because I don't know how good the human body can heal itself, maybe this story happened exactly as written, and a very human person really did die, or seemed to die, because he came back, or his body was able to recover, and that's where this story arose from. And the only reason to make these mental gymnastics is because part of you wants to believe that something about this story is true, or part of you needs to believe that, or however you want to put that. So it's still a mundane person. It's not a divine, because otherwise you'd say, of course he came back, because God exists, so God could just wink him back into existence, and you don't need to worry about how his mortal body would survive such a ordeal, because God just has magic. So you don't have to think about, well, how could it have maybe actually happened at all? That's not even a concern for most apologists, because they take it at face value. Especially this story, because it's so central to the Christian motif. So it's a very honest way of looking at that. Is well, maybe something like that really happened, and that's what the story is based on. Well, I think that nothing like that happened. I think that the evidence for it being a totally different story and then changed over time is greater than the evidence that any Jesus actually existed, and it makes that particular hypothesis that Jesus never existed fits the evidence a little bit better from my way of looking than it being an actual guy who actually lived, who actually went through anything like this at all. But either way you want to go with it, you still have a mundane explanation for what most apologists would claim is something you don't need to explain with the mundane, because you have the supernatural that's magic. So just bink, everything's fine now. But that's not what I hear in from Dr. Jordan Peterson. I do think he has a lot to learn about skepticism and atheism, and I get the feeling that he hasn't really interacted with atheists on the level that I would want him to, but I don't know if he has or hasn't. It's just that's the feeling I have. Anything else? No, I got nothing else. So, questions, comments, concerns, put them in the thing below. Or don't. I don't know. Whatever.